most business owners are technicians that have an entrepreneurial seizure.
There are just universal experiences that happen when you go out into the world and take that leap. What's missing is like looking at the bigger picture of the business. Like, why are we doing this? What is this about? How are all these things connected? How do I create a brand?
The moment that you kind of open the books and show people where are we truly at, it really helps people to understand.
If we're the only one that can do it, we really need to be very interested in multiplying, leveraging, multiplying. That's really what you need to do in your organization in order to continue to grow.
Well, here we are, Wendy, episode 2. Oh, it's exciting. It's been a lot of fun kind of just thinking about it and kind of having that creative space for it. I feel like the past couple of weeks, I've talked to a few people about doing more of the podcast, and I think I've lined up another person who used to be the CEO of Nextel, who then left to do business consulting. And so I think it's going to fit really well into our idea of the owner story, relationships, and how that lends to your career. And I think it'll be cool to see the corporate world to the consulting world as like a business owner.
Very cool.
Yeah. So today's about you. We're gonna hear your origin story, right? And I would love obviously to know, really kind of start with how you got started in your career. Obviously, we both share our time at Siegfried, but I know you were there longer than I was. So talking through that and how you're doing now in consulting as well. So with that, you knew the archetype. We want to talk about what's your story, what's your origin story, the relationships, and then, at the end of the day, what's on your mind lately?
So the first thing I want to say is like, I've loved working. So I know a lot of people are like, oh my God, how could that be? But I've really been happy in my career. And I think I've been lucky because I do think that it has centered around transformational businesses. But really importantly, I think more entrepreneurial ideas, though I would say I don't consider myself an entrepreneur, though it doesn't mean I don't have characteristics or an understanding of the power of being an entrepreneur and having your own business. I have participated, though, in all cases with, smaller enterprises that then ended up growing into larger enterprises as well. And I would suppose, it would be easy for me to start from an origin story is that I came across, when I was in my late 20s, I happened to live in Northern California, and I came across an ad for, I don't even know that they called it business coaching, honestly, but there was something compelling and it was actually an ad. Okay, so this is how far back it was in the 90s. And it ended up being for Michael E. Gerber's company, which at the time was called Gerber Business Development, that ended up becoming called variations, E-Myth Academy, E-Myth Worldwide. And, a lot of people, I'm shocked today, don't necessarily, if I bring it up, know who Michael Gerber is, or if I say E-Myth, they're like, what is that? But I think but what everyone does know is that phrase, working on it, not in it.
Yeah.
And that goes back to him and his book. And he's written a lot of books, but the book that everyone still says that it, talks about really the story of the small business owner, why one goes into business and how they're an entrepreneur. And it's the E-Myth Revisited is the best one. It's a story. And again, it applies to all businesses. And interestingly enough, I went in and ended up interviewing and ended up becoming a business coach there. They had a very extensive program. I myself did not necessarily, I wasn't a small business owner, but they had, a approach to coaching, which by the way, was before all of the coaching certification that we know today. And It was really a way to think about one's business and then it had different approaches and content. So I had weeks of training. And then after that, ended up really getting my education by working with a variety of business owners. And this went on for like 16 years. And it would be either like coaching 3 times a month over the phone. And they would literally like fax in worksheets, fax, exactly. Later, it was email attachments. And my first client was actually in Australia. It was a couple that owned a printing business. And I just learned so much. And I think that is when I really fell in love with business overall, in terms of, again, my respect for small business ownership. And also the importance of how you think about business is how you do business. And
Yeah.
there was a model and an approach and a thinking, as well as actions, in order to really be successful. And again, I was so blessed with having that exposure.
Yeah, I think I always enjoyed E-Myth Revisited. That was the version I picked up, being a little bit younger, I guess.
Yeah.
It was the original in my mind. And my favorite lines or phrases were, most business owners are technicians that have an entrepreneurial seizure, right? And
Well done.
I see that in my business all the time. It's a lot of times you're really good at one thing, and then you start saying, I could probably turn this into a business, and you realize, oh crap, real soon there's so many other things I need to learn about, which is essentially stuff that I've always loved, being in the operations of companies. And so I think E-Myth was awesome because for me it was one of those. I don't know if it was the first, but one of the first that I read about that was like, oh, how to operate business. There's several of them out there. There's the Vern Harnish's Scaling Up. There's the Gino Wickman's Traction and EOS. But that was the first time that I was like, oh, okay, like, yeah, there's actual like frameworks to follow when it comes to business. So I was always impressed when we were at Siegfried. You had come from that world of E-Myth and Michael Gerber.
Yeah. Well, you remember, and you just described it beautifully. And it's funny too, because Vern Harnish, he ended up speaking at a Siegfried event, but I had run into him and met him before because he had, many conversations with Michael Gerber, who at the time was, speaking a lot. And then we had this coaching, training, education business for business owners internationally, and which was great. And what's interesting about what you're saying too is that even though that was probably, I think, my greatest education about business, not just because they also had a way to teach it, but also because I got to see so many business owners apply it, and I got to see the universal application. And that was the thing, is it didn't matter what kind of industry you were in, what part of the world you were in, what you grew up with. There are just universal experiences that happen when you go out into the world and take that leap, whether you started the business or inherited it. And so there are things that apply. And that was appealing to me because seeing those helped me be more effective. Also, not only just in working with business owners, but then at the same time that was occurring, I was also leading, teams. I was also, out there then at one point running the company. And so it also helped me learn how to think about the business in a larger context. And what surprised me the most, which I think maybe, I don't know, it wouldn't be obvious, is prior to E-Myth, I had worked for Jenny Craig in the 90s when that was a big thing. And when I came into it, I had gotten a psychology degree. I ended up getting married pretty early, and my husband was in the Air Force. So I found myself back in South Carolina, and I was going to go back to school and end up pursuing physical therapy. There was a need at the time. I was enrolling to do it. And I got a job at a Jenny Craig center, and it was kind of exploding at that time. And the owner, it was a franchise owner that I worked for. And within 3 months of me being there, I was probably 24. He promoted me to center director. And the reason I think, and then I'm like, screw school. Like, why do I need that? I think I found my thing, is that They did have they were so great in their training and what their brand is. They had to do multiple locations. You needed to give this consistent customer experience every time. Their metrics were phenomenal. At the time, all their ads were on television, and they would have everything down to where if someone called in, for example, you needed to get them in the door that day,
Oh, wow.
where if you didn't, if you called them the next and they made an appointment the next day. And so they just really understood the business. They understood what the experience was. And you could literally go into any location and just take over. And in fact, I moved to California and I continued to be the center director of many different centers in Southern California and Northern California. And when I think back about that experience and my sense of ownership for what was happening in each of those centers and my representation of the brand, understanding the business, leading the team, and serving the customer, in some ways, I think that gave me more understanding when I got to eMyth about how to work with business owners. Because if you recall, a big part of eMyth is also pretend your business was going to be replicated in multiple locations, different teams. It wasn't reliant upon you. How would you need to build it? And I do think that earlier, experience in my career helped me be, even though I was young, pretty effective with resonating, with the business owners, and also just having a great respect for what can occur if you understand and you think about it from that perspective.
Yeah, I keep kind of coming back to this idea, and Rob used to say this back in the day. I'm the entrepreneur, you guys are intrapreneurs, right? And
Yeah.
being the integrator, COO for businesses, it's oftentimes I'm like, how do you assess for entrepreneurial drive? Because I'm working in these entrepreneurial businesses, and ultimately, well, inherently, if you're taking a W-2 job, like there's probably a certain percentage that just aren't going to have that entrepreneurial drive. They're looking for a job, and there's nothing wrong with that. But like the way that I've always kind of thought of it is like gumption, like how like they're going to own, like you said, like I'm going to own this process. I'm going to own understanding these metrics and what they mean. And if you can find somebody like that, you can truly let go of the vine as a business owner, and really start to build a culture that is highly productive beyond just the owner themselves, which allows for stabilization and then ultimately scaling. So it's cool to hear like your career of like really leaning into what's in front of you in the business that you're in, and how you have in a way taken ownership of those those things that you can help drive and be successful with.
Yeah. I love how you said that. No, I
Yeah.
think that's true. And the ownership is an interesting piece, right? But it also does come to your perspective about it. Like, what am I getting paid to do? Why am I here? What do I want to get out of it? And then thinking about it beyond the work. And I sometimes think that is one of the things that maybe gets in the way, even when I've worked, as a manager and having teams, seeing other managers at times is that they're looking at, whoa, how do I project manage? How do I allocate, resources to get these things done? But what's missing is like looking at the bigger picture of the business. Like, why are we doing this? What is this about? How are
Sure.
all these things connected? How do I create a brand? And I do think that to me is probably what I love the most about it is the idea of creating a business that serves a client in a differentiated way that creates something meaningful, while at the same time then providing this team environment that a group of individuals can collectively be able to focus on an outcome together. And to me, that's like the greatest team sport there is. Being someone who didn't grow up playing team sports, I think I found my connection to that and my appreciation for that in business, which is why I, still love it. And I still love seeing people create something, spectacular together.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So, all right. So let's shift gears a little bit, in the podcast, right? So we
Yeah.
moved from early career, Jenny Craig, to eMyth.
Yeah.
After eMyth, was Siegfried next?
Siegfried was next. So I've really had like three, I would say significant,
Okay.
periods of time, with eMyth being like almost 16 years. And then Siegfried, working as an employee of the firm, was about 13. But the connection to all this is that I met Rob Siegfried in 1997
Yeah.
while he was an eMyth client. And so I met him. I was like new to eMyth, and he was shifting to start working on his business, not in it, which was a really big thing, particularly in the accounting world. I mean, still to this day,
Yeah.
if you just look at professional services, whether you're legal, it's a law firm or accounting firm, right? You still have to serve so many clients. You're the rainmaker, and then you're also trying to grow a business. And
Chief.
Rob actually stopped doing that and started working on the business, and was a great success story. So I worked with him as his business coach. At times I would go and do different sessions for his team. And then I was on his advisory board for a while. And then I moved into working for the firm as well. So my connection to Rob and his entrepreneurial nature and what he created was because of eMyth, and I will say that's what I loved about it. So I do remember the days when he was, really starting off and transitioning, and to see what it's become. I've always just said, and, I'm just so proud of him, but I was also very, like, deeply lucky to be part of the organization, but also to have an appreciation of starting, with money from your parents and actually growing a business that stands for something, and how many jobs were created and how people work together. And so that's just, that's everything.
It's interesting. I think it was eMyth. So this is kind of a generational thing a little bit. Obviously, that I worked operations at Siegfried in so many different roles,
Yeah.
but a lot in that Wilmington office. And oftentimes I'd just be given odd and end tasks to do. And I think one of them was to go in and find the binders that were eMyth and put them in order. And I think Rob wanted it for something. And so it's interesting. You're talking about the actual lived history of a task that I was given, of finding the like plastic binders that pop open, the cassette tapes and all the notes, and I'm trying to put them in order. And I'm like, I've got 6 and 8. Where's 7? And I don't know where it is. So it's interesting to hear you talk about the history behind something that was just, from my perspective, a to-do that needed to get done, because I think at the time Rob was just looking for something out of that.
You think he was? Yeah, I think George, his brother, was as well, if I recall correctly. But yes,
Yeah.
I remember you touching that. In fact, I think we had a conversation like, what are these? Where are they living? And I think we were trying to find, all of them. But yes, at that time, that's where they came. We were sending them via mail. There was, none of this digital content at the time. Yeah, I know. And there were cassette tapes. That's so true. CDs later, but
Yeah. Yeah.
it's all vintage now.
So walk me through, I mean, like, relationships that, as you've gone through Siegfried, roles that you had. I mean, I only know of you as a senior vice president and stuff, but to the extent that you want to chat about it, I'd love to know, much like I had a bunch of different roles, what are the roles that you had over the years in Siegfried?
Because of my relationship with Rob over the years, and then also being part of his advisory board, as well as the fact that I moved into running eMyth for a while. So I had more of the experience of running an organization, being responsible in that regard. When I came on board, I was fortunate enough to be brought in as a vice president and to be added to his executive team.
Awesome.
So, again, I think the duration of the relationship and the different experiences that we both had together professionally, added to that. And so when I came in, I think the first 6 months I was out there just working with a variety of team members. And it was also the early days of the sales organization, sales ops, as we called it, which is how you and I, were first looking at it, and then ended up within 6 months, I would say, becoming what they called at the time a regional market leader, and we had 4 regions, there were 18 offices. And being here in California, I was responsible for the West region. And so we had, 4 different markets in the West. And then my job was to move that part of the business and focus with the rest of the company and the executive team at Rob's leadership, to really focus on, recruiting, retention, and sales, and just really building out our brand, meeting our goals, and really growing the business. And I was in that role for 10 years. Along the way, there was a lot of national responsibilities. I would say predominantly working with the sales team, the BD team at large, or in the field, I would say, as opposed to being like in Wilmington in operations. And it was only my last 3 years that I was more in an operations role, and not so much as a field role, is how I would look at it. But I got to see so much growth and transformation. I mean, during that time, it was an exponential. It was huge. It was just a huge time for the firm in terms of revenues, in terms of employee growth, in terms of leadership advisory, which is a big part of what the firm, how they go about serving their purpose and serving their clients and also their employees. That all came into being. And so again, I mean, the best people, and just learned so much from it, and loved, getting to see again the entrepreneurial story realized. And it was a true entrepreneurial story.
Yeah, it's for all the education that I've had, when I think back, certainly getting my MBA, or getting my MBA through Siegfried, it opened the door to a lot of things. I'll never forget when I told Steve that I would come work full time, and he was like, "No, you have to get your MBA. Like, you can't stop this. Because I was working full time and going to school pretty much full time." And I just remember thinking like, man, the education that I'm getting in my MBA just doesn't, like, it felt like so theoretical, and super corporate, level, which ironically makes sense in hindsight. But my biggest learning always came from Siegfried. And I learned so much, even that, like, when I left and went out and started doing what I'm doing now, like, I fall back on all the lessons I've learned, all the books that I read about entrepreneurship, and realizing like, wow, like I really got like a boots on the ground experience of like, how do you go from being this kind of small, like, family invested business to hundreds of millions of dollars. And I have to say, like, if I had to think of like where I really got like the school of hard knocks of learning what it's like, it was at my days at Siegfried.
Not all entrepreneurs or business owners think about how to continue. They want to educate their employees, in terms of beyond. It happened to be that was also one of, the commitments Rob had.
One of my favorite memories, you and I were texting the picture from the private jet. And I think it was LA to Las Vegas, if I remember correctly. I think we left a new hire.
I think it was Salt Lake City, actually.
Oh, you're right. Yeah, Salt Lake City to Las Vegas. And I'll never forget how, like, I felt like a baller that day because we got onto this plane. We show up on the tarmac in Las Vegas. These black SUVs take us to a stage. We're walking in backstage while Rob's walking on stage. And I'm like, this is my life. Like, what is this?
I know it. I know. It's like pinching. I had a lot of those moments where, you're with all these great people. And
right.
Like, no, I'm getting paid to be a part of this. Like, this is a really cool place. And I do think there is something about a more entrepreneurial environment, private industry in particular. And, we also serve, certainly at Siegfried, a lot of public companies. And even when I was at eMyth, even though we serve small business owners, I did work with a lot of enterprise companies that were made up of small business units. And I can tell you when I was working like with the, training and development or, some type of, I work with a lot of for some reason, we had a lot of insurance and financial advisory companies, and they were always made up of, smaller, whether it's licensing or they just wanted people to run their businesses more from an ownership perspective. And the employees inside the enterprises, so many would say, gosh, I wish, I had the courage to go out on my own and create something. Like they really admired it. But at least, we're very excited to like work with and help a network of businesses, and business owners and people that were willing to take that risk, because does feel risky. And in order to take that leap, in a way that, again, a W-2, it just isn't all that risky. I mean, you could maybe make the wrong choice, or maybe there's something that you missed out, or do I do this or that? But there is nothing like putting yourself on the line.
Yeah.
And I've always respected it. I've worked, alongside it, and I've never taken it for granted. Full admiration for sure.
Yeah, I think I was actually over New Year's hanging out with some friends, family friends of ours, and one of the smartest people I know. He is I'm trying to think. He's not a corporate attorney. He does like corporate litigation, I believe. So I think it would be like the equivalent of like a Dwayne Morris type. And this guy, they go into lawsuits and you have to become a subject matter expert as a lawyer. So they just read and read and read and just know so much. And then I was also hanging out with a corporate attorney I had just met. And it was cool because in that scenario, it's very easy for my mind to perceive that like I'm the dumbest person in the room for some reason. And what one of the guys said to me was like, so you run your own business and you have your own clients? He's like, that's the dream. And I was like, what? Like, it just kind of made me step back and realize like, oh, like I actually do have a really successful career as a business owner. And I think I said last time, I wouldn't go back. It's allowed me a freedom of creativity. This podcast wouldn't exist without that. Meeting you and saying, come join me on this journey, all of that is coming from a place of, I don't have a boss. I get to choose how I want this to look. So to shift gears, now you're getting into consulting and kind of coaching, and you talked about eMyth, where you really help small to mid-sized businesses. We've talked about Siegfried, which I would say is getting into that large, still private, but very large business. What are you doing in the consulting world, and who do you want to serve as you're really building that up?
In reflection of my career, that I feel most passionate about, and also that I do think there's a need, which is actually helping individual contributors become not just leaders of themselves, but to be leaders of others.
Sure.
And to then also at the same time, then be able to also think in terms of a business and see, the output of creating a business and, running and leading a business as well. When I think about the different concerns and conversations in a business, if you are talking to executives, for example, executives will talk about challenges of operational excellence, or how do I get this vision or this idea and it's just not happening out in the field? How is this, we're not executing as well as we could. I think we've got the strategy, but we need to execute better. And you hear that, time and time again. At the same time, you have, if there are, and the company is big enough to have mid-level managers or supervisors that are responsible for others, a team, as well as getting business results. If you talk to that group nowadays, you hear a lot of concerns around being spread too thin, less resources and support coming their way, having more people reporting to them, not really understanding, feeling in the middle, and also feeling fairly insecure about what role they play in the future, because you keep on hearing about thinning organizations. And then you have the frontline employee, and then also up and coming leaders who are saying, I never want to go. I'd like to be promoted. I want to advance. I want to be part of something great, but I'd never want to be the person I work for, because they're like, they're, I don't know, they're working their ass off, but they're not really getting anything done. They're miserable. Why would I want to set myself up for that? And at the end of the day, I really do believe, even with all the technology we have, we still need to have strong managers or leaders of others, team leaders that can also tie it to the larger business in order to improve execution. So I have a certain passion for being a manager and someone inside and learning how to think, one, like an owner, and also to understand the business, but also how you develop people and build the next generation of a talent pipeline, and also be able to actually execute from vision to the end. And I just think there's a need in the management leadership space that I would love to spend more time developing managers. And so I've been working on frameworks of how to do that. And I want to do it, for some individuals that maybe just feel like they're not getting the training, and they feel kind of like I'm just making it up. And I'd love to get more training on it as an individual and be better at it. And then at the same time, in organizations that are at least large enough that have some management layers in order to help them bridge from vision to execution.
Yeah, it's two things are coming up for me while you were talking about that. One is the idea of the individual contributor to manager, and the other one is kind of the macro trends. So for the first part, I always think when I hear individual contributor, I always think of the salesperson, right? And high powered salesperson crushing it, doing well, does not always equate to good manager. Might be a lone wolf and they're so good you can't deny it. They might be good at it, but they don't know how to translate that to others. And recently, the guy that was the CEO of Nextel, I asked him I told him about what we're doing on the podcast, what to expect when we do talk to him, and he said I was always a salesperson, and then he became the CEO, and I was like, that's interesting because I don't typically hear that type of thing. But the other thing to kind of speak to that kind of management when you get there, I absolutely see a macro trend right now where due to inflation, due to AI, all of it, what we're seeing is a rise in wages, but not necessarily a rise in productivity equivalent to that. And then most people would say the answer to that is AI bringing in efficiency. But what happens there is you cut 3 jobs into 1 job, and then you give AI. And so to your pain point that you were speaking to, a lot of people are getting into these positions and the environment is completely changed and it's less people at the end of the day, which is, the whole host of feelings around it.
Yes, let's look at efficiencies and let's look at how we can leverage all of the amazing technology that's out there. Like, again, we got to learn how to utilize that, think about it. And so that's a whole new skill set. And it's also increases a lot of really wonderful time for some of the things that maybe managers have always needed to do in terms of development of people, the human interactions, relationships you're building, influences that you have, looking at your business in terms of how are we doing to serve the customer? What are we really, and how can I help people, grow here and this really create a dynamic environment that can leverage technology and work alongside it. But to me, we have to talk about both, right? I mean, I think everyone is saying we're not going to eliminate the need for human connection and relationships and also the ingenuity and creativity. AI can help us do better, but we have to really be able to put it in the proper perspective. But if you talk to a lot of people, they are thinking about the tasks and how they're going to manage what they need to get done during the week. I don't know how often they're actually looking at the larger picture. And so I think it's really trying to expand or maybe even reimagine what management actually means. And I don't think it's just eliminating it, because who's out there orchestrating? Like, you need orchestration. And that's the problem with, if you want to orchestrate or you want to execute on your strategies, awesome. But what are they? And do you know them?
Yeah, it's It's really cool, and I guess this gets us a little bit into the like, what are we thinking about now? And AI is such the hot button issue. I have a company. We have three pillars, and it's those three pillars are a culture of AI enabled critical thinkers, a culture of relationship building, and a culture of efficiency. And what I love about AI, the pros to me are it gives us an opportunity to build a new like neuropath in our brain. Um, and once you've developed that muscle, then you realize you have this whole world of creativity that is new that you never thought of before because you would have spent 4 hours just getting to the point that AI is getting you there in 4 minutes. And so what's important is that you don't just trust it, because it can be AI slop. But
Yeah.
when you get there, now your creativity is going because you just like it's fun. It's like a checklist. You just did 100 things in 10 minutes. That is exciting. But it can't stop there because we have to take that input or that output from what we prompted it with and take it to the next level and bring it down to the human level. And I think that's where it gets really exciting. And what I've seen is teams really embrace it. And when they do, they start creating their own custom GBTs. They start enhancing the processes, and it's all humans getting excited about how they can make things more efficient. And so it becomes a culture of efficiency, but it's really driven by humans being excited about the creativity behind the efficiency.
I love that. And that's also, you just made me think about being effective, right? It's
Right.
efficient and effective, where you can be efficient and not effective at all. But
Yeah.
what's also true is that it goes back into thinking about what can be created, kind of like in sales, right? Are you going to figure out how to create more revenue, create growth, or are you going to simply look at cost cutting? Doesn't mean that there aren't times to look right at the efficiencies to say, where are we expending our resources? Is it the best way to do it? And this is no longer working, so let's divert, right, our energies and resources elsewhere. But I like the shift, because I think a lot of conversations that are out there around AI happen to be like, oh, they're just doing that. This job is eliminated because we're going to cut costs by using AI. And I don't really think that's the optimal way to be thinking about the possibility in order to create something great, right? So again, it's the mindset of, what are you doing and how are you thinking about it? And I think that's where a lot of entrepreneurs and business owners need to spend some energy, is like, how am I thinking about it? How can I be thinking about it? And then how do I get my team to think about it at the same time? And
Yeah.
really drawn, portrayed a beautiful picture of the creativity of it. And you even used the word fun. So that is how, we spend a lot of time working, and it should be fun.
Yeah. Yeah. The other example I can think of has nothing to do with AI is my family's business. And I did their annual in early January, and they don't use AI really at all. They're an automotive business. And I looked, at their financials and I said, let's just set an initiative to cut 10% from the expenses. And I said, I have no reason for it. I'm just curious if it's a possibility. And since then, we're less than a month out. They've already found $150,000 in savings, and that's come from finding a relationship that we're getting a supply. We have a supplier. We realized one was a third party. We could go direct, $75,000. We, over the course of the year, had sold one of the businesses that had kind of been hampering the other business. That already is, saving almost tens of thousands of dollars a month on it. And so you can just sit there and annualize that out and say that business is no longer hampering the other business. We decided to use gallon bottles or drums, and now we went back to drums. There's $5,000. And this is all just, what's cool is that when you put that out there, it gets the human brain creatively thinking. And so what's cool is that that exists without AI. And so how do you equip people with AI to keep that same way of thinking? And that, if that can happen, I think that's where the real power and synergy comes in.
That's incredible. So That's incredible. So let me just ask you, because you mentioned too this year. So you did several annuals, right? So in January, this is your focus with your clients.
Yeah.
So are you finding that this call to action, are you seeing that with your other clients as well?
Yeah. I think several different examples. One, I got a client that just had a lot of turnover, and the visionary is very much saying, we need manpower, and it'll eventually come to me rolling off, because I was very clear. I'm 8 hours a week. I cannot give you the hours that you need to get the work done that needs to get done. And in those situations, I'm very comfortable. Like I will figure out my future on my own outside of this. So it was cool to like be able to have that conversation. The other one is we're really bringing these AI and automation tools in, which really means that all the kind of lower level boots on the ground tasks at the help desk level don't need to be done by humans now. So that's effective hourly rate should essentially go up, but we should also we should have efficiency from that. And so now we are starting to really assess what is the ROI, which really should be dollars dropping to the bottom line. One of the big things I'm focusing on right now and thinking about is financial literacy of the team at the leadership level and management level. I think oftentimes small and mid-sized businesses kind of hold tight to budgets, and that's something of letting go of the vine. And the moment that you kind of open the books and show people where are we truly at, it really helps people to understand that oh, margin is not profit, and my department, continues to add up all these subscriptions, but are we actually using these subscriptions? And so it starts the conversation around revenue minus expenses equals profit. Don't overcomplicate it. Just understand that simple math equation, and then understand that if you're in sales, you're bringing in the revenue, and then you've got some expenses. If you're internal, you've got expenses that need to be managed against the budget. And once you start doing that, then you start to understand how everything that you do relates to the bottom line. Um, and then you can start to apply that to AI. And okay, well, if that saved me 2 hours of time for each tech on my team, and I've got 5 techs, well, that's 10 hours a week that I've saved. That's 40 hours a month. That's an entire work week of an employee. So you can start to say over time, what would that be? 12 times 40 would be 480. And so you start to realize, oh, I'm really starting to add up time. What am I doing with that tech's time now? And so for me, I think it's like helping people understand the finances at first, and then connecting that to the activity going on in the department, and how you're utilizing your team as efficiently as possible while managing a budget.
That's great. That's great. Well, congratulations on getting through January and getting all the annuals kicked off.
I'll tell you what, this one was a little brutal.
Well, and you do them in person too, right?
Most of them I do in person.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Love that. Love that.
So let's wrap up with what was one key relationship in your career that you can think of, and why are you drawn towards that relationship to this question?
Oh gosh. Well, gosh, I'm feeling pretty lucky because I'm actually coming up with 5, but I will pick one that I just feel like was just, right, critical or just really molding. So because I've already talked, I've mentioned, Michael Gerber already. We've been talking about eMyth, and we've talked about Rob, which those two obviously would be super up there. I should mention Eileen Gerber was a big part of that too. But the person that I come up with was actually the person that I first reported to when I went to eMyth. And her name is Janice. His name is Janice. And she had been there a while, and I reported to her. And we, at the time when I came on board, the company wasn't only, doing these coaching education programs for small business owners. We were in the process of certifying independent business consultants to be eMyth certified consultants, which in fact, that was one of the things that Rob was trying to build in the organization as well, because they had a lot of small business clients, particularly in the accounting advisory space. So I got to meet other people, but anyway, Janice, she had gotten sick. And so very quickly in my training, I needed to help her and be in front of the room with her when we were certifying these business consultants. So it gave me a big leap just because of circumstances. Like she was forced to almost create someone else that could help her, but then also be able to take over for her at times due to this health scenario. So why she was so important was that we'd literally have a day, it could be any day, and she would have this yellow legal pad that could, I swear to God, have 7 to 8 pages of notes for me on what I could do better, on anything. We could have been doing a training, preparing that day, getting ready, having calls, and she would have these pages and pages of notes. And I remember there was another woman that had been hired, was much older than me, that also was working for Janice and, brought a lot of experience to the table, but she couldn't handle the notes. She was like, I cannot be a part of it. I can't handle it. And I really embraced it. And I think the reason though, and it's not that I love to get, critical feedback all the time, is I could feel in Janice that she believed in me, that she was willing to invest in me, that she cared about me, and that she wouldn't have paid that kind of attention if she didn't think that I could do it. And so I really got the power of having someone really care about, their team member and be willing to develop them and just go for it. And I really think that shaped who I became as a manager and developer of talent as well. Like I will love on you all day long. And if I will look for your highest and best potential consistently. And I'm also willing to pay attention enough in order to invest and go through some uncomfortable conversations at time to help you get there. And hopefully you're feeling hugged at the same time that I do it if you have high potential, because she did have the care and I believed it. But being able to have someone willing to do that and what that meant for me and what that also freed her to be able to focus on by putting in the time to train made a big difference, because there's so many business owners and managers that don't delegate nor develop others because they're like, it just takes too much time. They're not getting it fast enough, or I don't like to do it, or there's going to be mistakes and it's not going to happen. And they never develop their people, right? So when I talk about, developing mid-managers, executives need to be developed too, depending on the size of company, in order to properly delegate and also develop teams. And so I really do think that she had a huge impact in terms of, my success later, but also just the learning that I received. Like, I'm just so grateful.
Yeah. It's, again, 2 things come up for me. It's one, when an opportunity comes knocking, you're going to walk through the door at the end of the day and be willing to have that feedback. And the other aspect is the training. I think it's very common for business owners to, or anybody, you get an additional resource and you dump things on them and expect them to just be running, versus like taking the time to slow down before you go fast, and really invest that time in them.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, no, it is. And sometimes, like I said, we talked about the word efficiency. Again, sometimes it's like, look, let me just get it done. I can't afford not to do it. So it's like understandable, but it never multiplies, right? We're never creating other capability if we're the only one that can do it, and so we really need to be very interested in multiplying, right? I mean, leveraging, multiplying, that's really what you need to do in your organization in order to continue to grow.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people get very nervous about that, and understandably, they've got a lot on the line, but it does actually hold them back, which is why sometimes you'll see, forever practitioners And then you'll see other people that took a practice and made it into a business. And I do think it has a lot to do with their point of view and also their willingness to develop others and make the investment.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right. Well, I think we got an hour in. So
I think we did. I hope it was all right.
Yeah, I think so. This has been great. I'm really enjoying this time. It's fun to just talk through these things. I get the feeling we're going to eventually call this Conversations with Leaders.